Probably one of my first memories of arriving in London was just how green everything was, because I had come out of Utah in the middle of winter where everything's just like gray and brown and gray. And even though it was the dead of winter in England, everything's still green. Even when all the trees are dead, like they're all covered in moss. And it was just incredible to me how beautiful the place was in winter. I guess probably one of the first things that surprised me that I hadn't really considered or known about London was the fact that it's a very cosmopolitan city, that there's not that many British people in the city itself. The very first lesson I went to was a man from Venezuela, and most of my first area was like that. We would teach about half the people were British and about half the people were people from all over the world, and that's something that continued throughout my mission. But it's something that I wasn't expecting because, you know, I think of London, I think of the Brits, but since there's so many immigrants there, a good chunk of my mission was teaching people from around the world. So the London South mission is everything south of the Thames in London. It stretches from basically where the river cuts through the city, all the way down to the coast, and then all the way from there out to Cornwall. So it's basically the entire southern section of England. And so because of that, it's a very, very, very diverse field, because when you're in London, it's a city, it's metropolitan, it's business people and wealthy Brits as well as immigrants and other people, and it's very, very compact. But then if you move out west, past areas like Stonehenge and Devon and Cornwall, those areas are much more rural and small town cities. So the work drastically changes depending on where you are in the mission. You could be in an area where you ride buses all day and spend a lot of the time talking to people on buses, or you could be in an area where you will, you know, drive an hour or so to get to the nearest village and then spend your time there and then move around in that case. So it's a very, very diverse area. You're also very lucky to be in the London South Mission because there's only 2 temples currently in the UK. And one of them, which is one of the original 12 temples around the globe, is in the London South Mission. It's right where your mission home is, so you spend quite a bit of time there and you're able to go to the temple a lot more than you would be in other missions. Because it's such a wide change geographically, I served in some wards that had 180 people attending sacrament each week. And they had to rent out a school hall because there was no buildings nearby that were big enough for them. And I served in wards that had maybe 60 to 80 active members. And so it really will vary where you serve. I had friends that served in branches that had 6 members that attend regularly. And so as you move around the mission, it can be very, very strong areas of the church where there have been members living there for hundreds of years, literally. And there'll be other areas where the branch was just barely formed within the last 20 or 30 years. And so it's incredible the diversity of the experience that you have serving in London South. Being called to England is something that's very exciting because of the heritage the church has in England. And this is something they spend some time with you at the MTC helping you to understand that the first and only mission that all of the 12 went together to work together was in England. As they all went up and served in northern England and also came down to London. And so I personally have a lot of heritage from the people that were converted from England and came over. And I know that the majority of the saints in Nauvoo and then those that moved over into the Salt Lake Valley came from England. And so Britain has a large history of being a place where the elect gather and where the strength of the church can be built. And it was a strong sentiment we had as we were there, that we were just part of something much, much bigger than ourselves, and a work that had been started in that country, 200 years before us. And we were just following in the footsteps of Heber C. Kimball and Parley P. Pratt and other people like that. I think one of the most frequent things that I ran into as an opposition or as a problem in teaching was it wasn't very apparent for people often, I guess, what was the point of the restoration. And this is for people that already had Christian understanding or had been raised understanding Christian doctrines, both from England and immigrants. Many people just would love the message we would share and would agree with us and want to talk about Jesus Christ, but would struggle to understand exactly why having the Book of Mormon is such a blessing, or why we care about our prophets or feel like our prophets are different than the ecclesiastical leaders that they have in their churches. And that was honestly one of the biggest struggles in teaching, to help people understand that that the apostasy was a real thing, that authority was lost, and that what we are sharing as missionaries isn't something that is, there's two different extremes, that it's something that either is just a suitable alternative to their religion, but something that is equal in value, or also that what we were teaching was not seeking to destroy or tear down or break away from any of the good things that they had learned. Some people would be offended or would be hesitant or angry or misunderstanding when we tried to explain to them that truth was lost. And I found you had to be clear, and you also had to be kind. You don't accomplish anything by just telling someone that they're wrong and that their church is hogwash and that it's the result of corruption or of misunderstanding. Because I strongly, personally believe that many of these churches were led and guided by men that were inspired and guided by God. But just simply helping them to understand that God is still actively involved. And while everything that they've learned that is true in their own church is good, that there is an opportunity for them to continue building the kingdom of God right now, that there is an opportunity for them to continue the work that Jesus Christ started all those years ago right now, that they have the opportunity to become involved in the actual and authorized kingdom of God here on the earth today. So it requires clarity, it requires understanding, and it requires a lot of asking them. And I think this is probably one of the biggest key points, is that you need to ask them what they think and what they feel about what you say before you proceed. You need to understand exactly where they're coming from and what they think about what you've said, so that you can address concerns as they actually are instead of as you imagine them to be. So making sure that any kind of teaching situation is an open conversation instead of a lecture, I guess. I began my mission in November 2011, and I finished my mission in November 2013. When I first got to the mission field, I served in Epsom for 6 months. Then I served in Staines upon Thames for 3 months. I served in Farnborough for 6 months. Then I went and served in Red Hill, which was actually in the Epsom ward, for another 3 months. I spent one transfer down in Southampton, and then I was transferred to Welling, which is in East London, for the final 6 months of my mission. So when I lived in Welling, that was the most central I got in the city. I was living on the banks of the Thames. When we went jogging in the mornings, we would go and we'd jog along the River Thames and watch the boats pass by, passing off the docks, and we could see the bridges off in the distance. London was a great experience of my mission. Something about being in London South is everything north of the river is kind of where they have more of the posh areas, the areas where foreign dignitaries live, and Kensington, which is the most expensive postal code in the country, as well as most of the places where tourists go to visit. South of the Thames is a lot more housing. It's where people live that then commute north to go work in the city. And so it was great to live south of the river because instead of dealing with tourists often, we were always dealing with people that lived there and worked there. I think Welling was probably where I experienced the most of the diversity that exists among the people that live in the UK. A typical day was after we'd wake up and we'd do all our studies and we'd leave our flat and we'd walk out, and the first person I talked to would be from Brazil. The person after that would be from Sri Lanka. The person after that would be from Spain. The person after that would be from Poland. The person after that would be from the States. The person after that would be from Mexico. And this was how it was anytime I was in London. So every place I went, I would be meeting people from all over the world. And it was fun to get to know all the different cultures and to get to know different people's habits and beliefs, and to try foods from all over the world. Once you serve in London, you'll eat something called fufu, which is an African dish. It's basically it's like bread cement that you dip in soup and you eat, and it just keeps you so full. And I learned on my mission how to meet and greet in, I think, 14 or 15 different languages, which is something I found to be really helpful among the people because it was an incredible icebreaker. I would meet someone from Ghana, and as soon as I would realize that they were from Ghana, I would ask them where they were from, and if they were from an area that spoke Twi, I would be like, "Oh, etuse, wahutasin," and they would be so happy to meet someone that spoke their language that they would stop and they would talk. And I did the same for many other cultures and different ethnicities and languages. When you live in London, it's all about buses as well. The entire mission, when I left, there was only 8 cars that full-time young missionaries would use. The rest were used by senior couples. The entire mission I spent walking. Walking and busing is basically the way you get around in London South. And so some areas like Farnborough, it would be just one single bus route that we get a bus pass on. But in London itself, you get an Oyster card, which is a pass that you can just tap on to any bus, any underground system, and most trains as well. And so anytime we wanted to get anywhere, we would jump on the bus. So one of the first things we would do as soon as you got into an area was look at the maps and try to memorize all the bus routes, because it's key to know which buses get you where quickly. And while we're on the note of buses, buses became one of my favorite proselyting experiences as well. Well, sometimes you get on a bus and all you want to do is just rest because you're so tired of walking and talking. People on the buses are often, tired too, and are ready to, any kind of distraction by talking to people next to them is very welcome. So I found it very effective to just jump on a bus and sit down next to someone and strike up a conversation. And it was a different kind of contact because instead of starting with the fact that I was a missionary, I was able to talk about them for a while and get to know them before inviting them to learn more about the church. It was one of my favorite ways to meet people on my mission, and very many, a lot of successes, a lot of teaching opportunities came out of that. South London is the most expensive mission that the church operates. It's mostly because of rent is so expensive for London, but also because travel and food are very expensive in London. The church gives you well enough money to handle housing and food and whatnot. As long as you're thrifty, you can make it through a month and eat well enough to be fine. As well as, depending on where you serve, members will feed you pretty well as well. I never once had an experience on my mission where I felt unsafe. There was never a time where I felt like I was in danger of being robbed or mugged in any way like that. While there were occasional vague threats from young teenagers or something like that just thought it'd be fun to poke fun at a holy man or something like that, it was far and few between. I can only think of maybe one specific instance where that happened. That being said, there are areas that you need to avoid, but anyone in that in each area will let you know where those are. But even some of those areas that are supposed to be dangerous, I never once felt unsafe in. You don't have to worry about your own rent. I know some missions, they have you take care of that and haggling prices and stuff like that. But the mission office takes care of all rent, and so you never have to once look at how much your rent costs. So your two main expenses are transportation and food. And so they give you, when I was there, it may have changed now due to inflation, but it was about 120 pounds or so a month for food, which, as I said, was perfectly fine as long as you didn't eat out too much and you were smart in your shopping and were willing to cook. That was always well enough to live well, especially if you and your companion combined your money together to buy your food. Transportation, depending on where you live, they give you the amount that you need for a bus pass. In some cases, we would dip into our food money to buy train tickets, because we usually have a little bit of that left over if it was more convenient or better or more time effective for us to take the trains every once in a while. But other than that, they would just give you the exact amount that you would need for a monthly or weekly bus pass, which would then work on all the buses in your district. One thing I would say about preparation for serving in London is obviously it rains, so you have to have good rain gear. A good enough, just buy an umbrella that's not too expensive, but that won't break easily because it's often windy while it's rainy. So if you have a cheap umbrella, it will unfold on you and will be annoying. Also, if you can get an umbrella that's compact, but not too cheap, it's very helpful, because I tried to have my umbrella on me at all times because you never knew when it was going to start raining. As far as clothes go, I'd actually recommend that you buy most of your mission clothes out there, because frankly, British nice dress is nicer and cheaper than American stuff. And so something that some of my friends did that I thought was a good idea is if you just buy a suit and enough shirts to basically get you through the MTC, and then save some of your money for when you get out there. Because I was able to buy a British suit, which was much nicer than my American suit, for about, the equivalent was about $70, while an American suit costs around like $160 or so. And also the shirts there I was able to get for £5 each, which is roughly about $7. Ties as cheap as £1, which is like $1.75. So yeah, I'd recommend buying most of your clothes and gear and stuff out there. So Farnborough was probably the smallest town that I went to on my mission. It's a small borough outside of the greater rings of London, basically. It's the birthplace of British aviation, first place they ever flew, so everyone there is very proud of it. But it's just, my entire area was just 3 different towns that were connected by one small bus route. And this area is kind of typical for most of the western cities or western areas in my mission, in that it was more British. It was actually kind of interesting because Farnborough was an old military base, so everyone that lived in Farnborough was either British or they were Nepalese. There was a lot of people from Nepal there. And so while I lived in Farnborough, my work focused mainly on teaching and meeting the British and getting to know them. And so that was one of the more well-established wards that had members that had been there for like 4 or 5 generations. And so the people there were, Mormon through and through, and were used to the way things were done there. Whereas other wards I've been in would have a lot more turnover of people moving in and out. Farnborough is a beautiful place. A lot of the bus routes I would take to get from town to town would go through incredible British countrysides where everything would be green and there'd be blackberry bushes on the side you could pick during the season. So while I lived in Farnborough, it was part of what's called the Reading Stake. And the Reading Stake's really fun to be in because it has a lot of historical sites and major areas as part of it. And so often my zone on P days would get on a train and we would travel together up to Oxford and spend our time up there. And if you have a chance to visit Oxford while you are there, I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful city where all the stores, the architecture is that the fronts of the stores were built, as much as like 800 or 900 years ago. And then they've left the fronts of the store standing, so all of the buildings look like they're from the 1200s, while the inside stores have been completely redone into modern stores. And you also have a great opportunity while you're there to see incredible museums of the history of England and of Oxford. Fun fact, it's called Oxford because they used to ford oxen across the river, which was a random tidbit of information I picked up while I was there. Favorite place to go if you ever serve in Reading Stake? After district meetings, my entire zone would always go to a place called Moon's Cafe, which is right next to a little bit ways away from the Reading Chapel. But the people that own the store love Mormon missionaries, and they expect us there every single Wednesday. It's a great place to go and get fries and a pizza and whatnot. One of the best chippies around, and they would offer discounts to Mormons as well, which was nice. When you serve in London, like I said, there's lots of Africans and a lot of West Africans specifically. Now, basically, most of them come from either Ghana or Nigeria. You have to understand, Nigeria and Ghana, while they all typically speak English there's also hundreds of different dialects as people come from different tribes or regions of Ghana or Nigeria. The 3 different groups that I met the most often were Ghanaians. Most Ghanaians speak something called Twi. And so a typical greeting in Twi is to say etuse, which is just hello. And if you say wohutasen, it means how are you? To which they respond eya. And they'd usually respond they laugh and like eya, brethren. Another interesting thing to say in Twi would be mipe fufu papa, which means I like fufu a lot. And no joke, if you were on the doorstep with like an African mother and you told her that, she'd probably invite you in and make fufu for you right there because they're so kind. And so anytime I met a Ghanaian, I'd ask them where they're from and I'd ask them what tribe. And if they said, I'm Twi, if I speak Twi, then I'd always respond with etuse uhutasen. From Nigeria, there was 3 different main tribes that they would come from. The 2 that I ran into the most were Igbo and Yoruba. So I can only remember the informal greeting for Yoruba, but it would be showapa, which is basically like what's up. And so if I met someone from Nigeria, I'd ask them where they were from. If they said Yoruba, I'd be, showapa, and they would always love that. And I'd usually go on, I actually learned how to say, what's your name? It's Kira Ukwe, which means what's your name, and after they respond, you respond Eruko Mini, and that means my name is Eruko Mini. So say what's your name, my name is, and they'd be so impressed by that they'd listen to you. So if you're Michael, my name's Michael, Yoruko Mini Michael Jarman, or Elder Jarman, I guess in that case. And the last one was Ibu. And so that was the other people. I wouldn't meet as many of them as I'd meet Yorubas, but there'd often be a lot of Ibu from Nigeria. And the greeting for that's simple. It's just kekime. And so you just smile real big and say kekime. And they'd always respond with an odema, which means, well, it's just the typical response to kekime. I'm not actually sure what it means. They never told me. But yeah, so I used those three greetings more often than anything else while I was living in London itself. In all honesty, if you were going to diss the British, they wouldn't mind it at all. They, one of the I guess key attributes of the British is they love poking fun at each other. Honestly, like one of the very, very sarcastic people, and like I felt like one of the ways they show affection is by little like biting sarcastic comments, which was kind of a bit different for me when I first got out there. One of the biggest differences between Americans and British as it comes to sarcasm, I feel like in America, sarcasm can be used and it is used often, but there's this connotation that it's kind of like a mean and kind of like underhanded thing to do, and like you kind of look down on people that are sarcastic really often. For the British, there's none of that. Absolutely none. They don't consider sarcasm to be a mean thing. They consider sarcasm to be the way that you say absolutely everything while you're there. And so it took me a little bit before I got used to just the sheer amount of sarcasm that's in everyday conversation. But if you can joke around with them, you'll have a lot of fun. And I spent a lot of time laughing with those people because they're very funny in the way they talk and the way they act. Although it's much more of a dry humor, it's hilarious and I love it a lot. I think one of the most apparent differences between Americans and British, and it's kind of cliche, but it is in a way true, is Americans are generally more immediately open with people, in that, at least, especially being someone who was raised in Utah, I was used to everyone being kind of on the surface friendly. The British, probably one of the best descriptions I've heard of them is that they have small, thin and fragile shells. As that it was very rare to meet a Brit who was super friendly and open from the get-go. But as soon as you crack through that shell, which you usually could just by joking around with them or being a friendly person, they would open up to you, and they are some of the nicest and kindest and just polite people after you do that. Of course, they're more likely to be rude to people they don't know at all, but if you kind of mouth it right back, in some cases you have to read the circumstance, they'll laugh along with you and jump on. And so it was hard when I first got there because I was just like, why is everyone so distant? But they're really not. They're just a small shell you got to break through, and you can make some of your best friends with the Brits after you do that. The British saints are some of the most inspiring and dedicated people I've met. They live in a very different world than the one I grew up in as far as antagonism against the church or against religion or against morals in general. But the people were so incredibly strong. And because they face a lot of opposition in living their religion, I became very impressed, and I took a lot back from just how strong and loving and how dedicated these people were. While many of them, it took them sometimes years to make the decision to join the church. Those individuals, once they make that choice, they're in it. They stay. They are those that are never to be lost after they make that decision. And so they're stubborn. And so once they decide to follow Jesus Christ and commit themselves to the church and to his gospel, they stubbornly keep it. And it's something that I try and emulate in my life since I've been home. It is very important for you to understand that British does not equal English. They're very different. English is someone that is from England. British is someone that is from the entire island of Britannia, which includes the English, the Welsh, the Scottish, and in some cases the Irish. So if you confuse that, you'll offend people, because the Welsh and the Scottish and the Irish would absolutely hate if you called them English in any way. They really would, yeah, they'll get angry at you if you do that. British does not equal English. All of them are British, only if they're from England are they English. Since you'll be in South London, you don't have to deal with a lot of the heavier accents. They usually speak a little bit more proper down there. And it's very easy for them to really understand them. The rough thing is if you start dealing with Northerners, because Northerners speak with a lot heavier accent and they'll come in very, very strong. And if you meet people like from Liverpool, like a Scots, you won't be on this kind of thing like this high. They'll be like, nothing's the matter, and it's down by the ship, and you know, like, you know, that is there, and you'll be like, okay, and you'll have no idea what they're saying. If you meet a Scot, very much the same. If you meet a drunk Scot, there's no way you're gonna be able to understand anything they say. England is divided up into all sorts of different sections as well. There's the South, there's the Cornish, the Devonshire, the Bath, there's the Londoners, and the Londoners have their own way of speaking and their own accent. South London is kind of more posh and proper. Well, outside of the city, southern London is kind of more posh and proper, and so they have the most refined accents. You go north into the Midlands, anything north of London, no one says the word the, they say t. So like, I'm going to the store, I'm going to the store, I'm going to the store, yeah, that would be it. And if you go far enough north, they don't say anything at all. They're just like, I'm going to store. And that's the, although if you get into like Newcastle, they say t. There's a famous British comedian that makes fun of Newcastle by saying, yeah, we went to the movies to watch Toot Lion, Toot Witch, and Toot Wardrobe. There's lots of weird little quirks like that. So you go up to the Midlands, there's the Birmingham accent, there's Lancaster and Yorkshire, and every different section has a different accent. Some, like, by the end of your time though, you'll be able to pinpoint where someone's from within like the first 2 minutes of talking to them, just based on their accent. Because honestly, like, accent sometimes changes. If you move 40 miles in a different direction, they'll speak completely differently than the people that you just came from. Accents are all over the place while you're there. I didn't come back with an accent. Unfortunately, that was like one of the things my family was hoping I would come back with an accent. I came back sounding weird, but I didn't come back sounding like a Brit, unfortunately. I guess it was because I dealt with so many different accents. I ended up becoming like a hodgepodge of all of them. Do you know how we all love the British accent here? And like, I don't know about you guys, but like when Brits came over here, like all my friends would always ask them to like, say like Aloha Mora, or like random, like Merry Christmas Harry, or like other things the Brits would say. When I went over there, they actually, like, a lot of the younger generation love the American accent, and they want me to like say quotes from their favorite movies, or like they'd want me to try and do my best impersonation of Barney Swenson, or different things like that. England is a very interesting place for religion. The British themselves have experienced, I guess, a falling away from religion over the course of the past century or so. Ever since basically World War II, the British people have become less and less religious. But the interesting thing about this is that it hasn't dampened the work of God among the people. An amazing thing I've found serving among the British is that many of the people my age, anyone from like 25 or younger or so, had been raised without ever learning about God. It's incredible that in a country that has such a strong Christian heritage that this would be the case, but because of the falling away over the centuries, this new generation has been raised without ever learning. And so most of them that I'd speak to, people around my own age, would have heard that, you know, God is some omnipotent, some supposedly benevolent being that was, you know, they'd been told basically it was a disappointment, or that people that, follow God are not, not wise or are, biased or old-fashioned. But they would have learned absolutely nothing more about God. And when I first got there, I thought that was a little bit, that was different, and that was hard for me to realize that. But once I recognized that, in a large part, the reason why these people didn't believe or didn't have God as part of their life was simply because they had never, ever had it explained to them. And from that moment forward, my mission changed to a large degree. I began seeking out people like that, and it became one of my favorite things to do. When I meet someone, the usual initial reaction is, oh no, like, I'm not interested in religion, religion's dumb, like, oh, only old people believe in God. But it was pretty easy to continue talking with them because the British are friendly people, even though they have a bit of a shell around their personality. As soon as you break through that, they're very friendly people. As soon as I would start getting to know them, I loved explaining to them the very first principle in the first lesson of Preach My Gospel. Just simply the nature of God. I explained to them that God is a person, that God is a man, a glorified and perfected man, but a man nonetheless, someone that we can relate to, someone that cares about us, someone that we can speak to personally and ask questions when we don't understand things. Someone who knows us personally, someone who loves us, someone who has cared about us our entire lives and has been trying and working to help us through our difficulties, someone that they can turn to when they have difficulties. Basically, the fact that I would be able to explain to these people that God wasn't just some supposedly benevolent dictator who did a bad job, as some of them saw it, but that God was actually a father, and that God is their father and feels for them and cares for them in the way a father does. For many people, this would be something that had never crossed their mind, something that they had never been exposed to. And it would be so new and so different for them that it would change their perspective completely. I saw some people that their first instinct was to ignore us, to shun us, to laugh at us. But as soon as I got them talking and was friendly with them, and then had the chance to begin explaining why I love Jesus Christ, why I follow God, and who God really is, they would want to listen, they'd want to learn more. And small things like that made a big difference, and that became one of my favorite parts about my work as a missionary. And that kind of covers a lot of the, that's basically the case for a lot of the religious climate among the British, but it's not the only religious climate there. There are still some strong Protestant and evangelical groups in England. I met with plenty born-again Christians or evangelicals, especially with the influence of immigrants. A large majority of Londoners are from Africa, or are second or third generation from Africa. And those people are all strong Christians. For the most part, people that believe in God, even though they may not. Some of them participate strongly or heavily in their churches, some of them don't. But I found with them a great love of Jesus Christ, and that was usually enough to be able to begin talking with them, and incredibly friendly people too. In more metropolitan areas, you'd also have many people from East Africa and from the Middle East, and so I had many conversations with Hindus or Sheiks, Muslims as well, and I found each one of the cultures and religions to be incredibly friendly and accommodating, and willing to listen as we spoke as well. There's basically 3 meals that the British serve to missionaries. I don't think this is the only things they eat, but these are kind of like more formal dinners, and so you will eat these 3 meals over and over and over and over again. They are spaghetti bolognese, which is simple. It's just spaghetti with some kind of a meat sauce. Shepherd's pie, which they make very, very good, very hearty shepherd's pie, and the British roast dinner, which is some kind of meat, some kind of vegetable, and loads of gravy and potatoes. And you'll eat those 3 meals more times than you can count over the course of your time there. Well, a lot of people dislike British food because it's more bland and vague. You'll grow to really like it. Some people's roast dinners are incredible, and their gravy is a lot better than here. Also, in Britain, every single dessert is called pudding. Dessert is pudding. Dessert equals pudding. And so when they set out your utensils at the beginning, you have your knife and your fork for your meal, and there's always a spoon for dessert. Because no matter what it is, even if it's muffins they're giving you for dessert, they will cover it in some kind of cream or custard or ice cream. And so you eat everything dessert-wise with a spoon. And you'll grow to really love custard. And once you get home, you'll miss putting cream on absolutely everything. But since England is such a diverse place, you will eat all different types of food. And my recommendation is just try everything, because like I said, you'd meet people from all over the world, and so you had all sorts of different types of food. I ate a lot of African food while I was in London, which is very spicy, very, very spicy. There was a couple of occasions where I would go to a house and they would give me a big bowl of African soup with or stew with fufu in it, and there would be like 1 or 2 ghost peppers, like whole ghost peppers in the soup that I would be expected to eat with the food. And so I got very used to eating very, very hot food while I served in London. Most members will be willing to decrease the spice if you can't handle it, but if you can, or if you're willing to be daring, I recommend to try and outspice them, because they'll love it. And you can have a lot of great spice competitions. Well, most of them don't go extreme. All of them are hotter than what I'm used to eating over here. But not just African food. I would often eat with Brazilians, and they would have great food as well, or Filipinos, or Sri Lankans, or Nepalese, and the food was always very, very diverse and would taste very different and have different levels of how filling it was depending on where you go. So my recommendation is just try everything. I mean, I ate everything from simple things, like I said, to roast dinner, to there was one time I had gizzard soup, which was actually one of my favorite meals I had in my mission. I ate balut. I ate fufu, and I had chicken done in more ways than I can count. I loved the food in England, and I recommend just taking full advantage of the experience while you're there. So there's a little town on the outer rim of London called Sutton that I served in my first area. Went up there oftentimes, and Sutton has its own wizard. He's known as the Sutton Wizard, and everybody knows him, and you'll just see him wandering around the streets. He has a cat that sits on his shoulder. He used to apparently tie it to his shoulder, but apparently the local authorities got mad at him. And he's just wearing this gigantic cloak. He has a staff with a jewel at the top of it, and he's like an ancient Celtic wizard that just roams the streets. You can talk to him. I got a couple pictures of him, but he was a very interesting character. He spoke in an old Celtic accent, so he would be very heavy and kind of hard to understand. He would talk like a normal person, honestly. Like, he wouldn't like shout spells at me. He just out about his wizard business, buying shoes or, I don't know, herbs or something. He was just an interesting character, yeah. Obviously, you call pants trousers, or you call, a car has a bonnet and a boot instead of a hood and a trunk. It's a rubbish bin, not a trash can. You go to a chippy, not a fast food place. There's so many random things I say. Oh yeah, it's a shopping trolley, not a shopping cart. Your umbrella is your brolly. Your boots are your wellies. The back of your eraser is a rubber. Um, and you'll take about a month or so before you'll be speaking like the rest of them without even meaning to. Probably the most common one is pants are not pants. Pants are trousers. If you say pants, that means underwear. So if you say pants, people will mock you. One day I was hiking from one town to the other, and it was pouring rain so hard that it soaked through all my waterproof clothing and my waterproof backpack and my leather scripture case, and got everything wet. Just hard rain sometimes. Most of the time weather is kind of just soft rain, occasionally hard rain. There's urban foxes throughout London. So that's probably my closest thing to a wildlife encounter is you'll see foxes just kind of roaming the streets around London. The greatest life lesson I learned on my mission, and the thing that has had the most impact on me, is something that I feel every missionary will learn as long as they're serving. That's simply that the atonement is a reality. God's power is real, and it will enter your life as you ask for it and as you serve Him. You will see it change people's lives. You will see people go from depths of despair and depravity and addiction and habit, and become people that I saw many different times. In one case, there was an individual who suffered head trauma and was struggling to think and suffered with alcoholism and smoking. And I met him about a month after he started meeting with the missionaries. It was right after he got baptized. A month or so after that, he helped me to do the new member discussions for someone we had just baptized. And he became an incredible missionary. I saw him speak in church. He became the gospel principles instructor. His life was changed by the gospel of Jesus Christ entering it. God's power is real, and you will use it on many occasions, and you will see it change your life too. I grew to respect the fact that much of what I was doing I couldn't do on my own, and it's things that the amount of energy or stamina or ability to think or reason or things that I had on my mission that I haven't been able to have as I've been pursuing my own life since. God will empower you to make you more than you are. He will make you who you need to be for the people that you are teaching. I had 3 months of my mission where nothing stuck. And what I mean by that is we would go out and we would find and we would teach and we would testify on the streets, and we would pick up investigators and we build a teaching pool, and 2 weeks later, all of them would be gone. Would either drop us or just disappear or would stop answering our calls. And this continued for 3 months, where every time we built the teaching pool, it would disappear almost immediately afterwards. And this became very, very difficult. It was one of the hardest things to do after I had a bunch of investigators, and all of them would disappear within the course of 2 days. And I would look at my planner for the next day, and there would be nothing. No one that we were going to see, no one that we were going to teach. And I would know that the only thing we could do was to go out scratch and try and find something new, build up from nothing. And after about the fourth or fifth time this happened over the course of these 3 months, I remember realizing that this is, it was a lesson that God was teaching. And that's simply that you don't have a choice of how things are going to turn your way or not your way while you're on your mission. You don't have a choice of whether or not people are going to listen to you, whether God's going to bless you with incredible investigators, or whether He's going to require you to walk through rainy streets trying to find someone to listen. You can only control one thing, and that's whether or not you will continue to be obedient, whether you will get up each day at 6:30, exercise, eat a good meal, and prepare yourself by studying for that day. One of my favorite scriptures became in the Book of Mormon, like the Book of Mormon in the Book of Mormon, where Mormon's talking to his son Moroni, where he talks about how he had become so discouraged that he realized that all of his preaching and everything that he was doing was going to be of none effect, that no one was going to listen to him, that the Nephites would be lost. But he said, nevertheless, we must continue to labor. We must continue to preach, lest we fall under condemnation. You are called to serve and to do that as ever God wants you to. And you should know that at the end of my 3 months there was a 16-year-old girl that got baptized. I remember at the end of my time in that area, I looked through and there was this gigantic stack of former investigators, of people we had started teaching and lost. And there was one sheet that we had moved over and into the baptized and confirmed. And I realized that all of that work was worth it, even if we didn't find that girl, because of the lessons I learned and the fact that I can say that I continued to try to do what God wanted me to do, even though it wasn't easy, and even though for a lot of the time it didn't appear as if it was yielding any fruit. There was a family that I began teaching. It was right when I got into my last area in Welling. And about 2 or 3 days after I got there, the father called me and said that he had been meeting with missionaries earlier, but had to stop because of personal circumstances. But then had just barely had things clear up enough so that he could begin meeting with us again. We were obviously very excited, so we went and met with him. And him and his family lived in a teeny house. It was built into the side of an existing house and consisted of 3 rooms. One was a kitchen, one was a living room, and then one was a bedroom. And so we would meet in this little bedroom that was probably like, I don't know, maybe 6 feet wide by like 8 feet. And we would sit and we would talk with them. Over the course of teaching them, we learned that the circumstance he faced before it was that his worker's visa had been denied as part of some kind of legal reform that was going on. And so at no fault of his own, he was now not allowed to work and did not have the money to travel, barely had enough money to keep his 3 kids full day to day. And so him and his wife continued to just struggle day by day to make things work. And we had no idea this was going on for the first 3 months or so we were teaching him. And once we found out, we enlisted the help of the ward and everyone else around. But I'll never forget this person's faith, because this was the hardest thing that he had experienced up until this point. He had always been a prosperous and wealthy man. He was a hard worker. He was smart. But because of circumstances outside of his control, he lost everything. And I remember him telling me that never throughout any of this time did he doubt God's love for him. He struggled with knowing why he had to endure what he was enduring. They got baptized about a month or so after I left the field. But the very last day I was there, I hugged him, and his kids hugged me, and we talked before I was leaving. And they told me that before they started meeting with us, they had began sinking into despair because they had no idea what they were going to do. But that our meeting them was a catalyst that changed the way that they treated each other, the way that him and his wife loved each other and was able to support and care for their children, the hope that they felt for a brighter future. And I grew to love this family so much. And it's those kind of experiences of getting to know people and getting to know them and their struggles, and seeing how the gospel and the fellowship of a ward can change circumstances for them, that I remember about my mission, and the thing that made everything that we done worth it. I can't even tell you how happy I am for you that you get to go serve your mission in South London. While you're there, you're going to learn so much about yourself and who you are and who you were before you came. You should feel honored and grateful that God has allowed you, in His mercy, to be able to spend some time laboring in His vineyard, that He's given you a small patch to work. My time in London South has changed me completely. While I was there, I came to know my Savior. I received remission for my own sins as I preached His word. I saw lives changed. There is a great, great work to be done there. And I'm so happy that you have a chance to be part of it.